Good morning, it's Juliet Bruce-Jones, Domaine La Tasque. Meant to be doing a live Facebook feed this morning, but technology failed, so just doing a video and we'll upload it later. I put a message out yesterday saying story of a vineyard when it's time to say goodbye. Slightly provocative title. But before I go any further, I'd just like to say that Domaine La Tasque is continuing. The goodbye is not to the domain as a whole. It's been a tough year with frosts and COVID and everything like that. But no, we're still going strong, very optimistic about the future. But the story and the goodbye relates to one vineyard, this Syrah vineyard here, which it's very windy, which is why I'm talking in the car, because wandering around, I thought you probably couldn't hear me, although we will go out and have a look in a minute. So this vineyard here was where it all began. This was the vineyard that our first vineyard we bought in 2011. And when we bought it, when we decided to buy it, we weren't thinking of buying a domain. We weren't thinking that we were going to have huge production or anything like that. It wasn't the start of empire building or anything like that. It was just, why not? Let's buy a vineyard, let's put our knowledge into practice and just see what happens. It was nothing, there was no business plan, there was nothing more thought out than that. It was in beginning of January, as one often makes life-changing decisions at New Year. We were going for a walk and we just thought, well, what do you want to do this year? And I said, well, let's buy a vineyard, off the cuff. And we were with our neighbour, who said, oh, my cousin is selling her Syrah vineyard. And we're like, oh, well, let's have a look. And this is the vineyard of Juliet's cousin. And we looked at it in winter, which is not a particularly encouraging time to look at a vineyard. It's just a load of sticks in the ground and it was cold and miserable and et cetera, et cetera. And what attracted us to it is the fact that it's all on its own. I'll show you later, but in a minute. But it's all on its own. It's there's no neighbours spraying whatever they spray on their vine. So it was very much that you could control the environment around it. On the downside, it was very low planting density. And it had been looked after, but it had been farmed conventionally, which means, weed killer, twice a year, fertilizer synthetic fertilizer to boost the yields, etc., etc. And the soil was pretty dead. No weeds at all, nothing. It was completely just bare earth and very compacted bare earth. So the challenge was really to invest a little bit in a vineyard and to bring the soil back to life and see whether we could make a bit of wine from it. But we were carrying on sending the grapes to the Cave Cooperative and just making a few bottles on the side. So that was in 2011. The first thing we had to do was prune the vineyard, which, I'm a master of wine. I've got these fancy letters after my name. I've written essays on pruning. But the first time you're in your vineyard with a pair of secateurs, I realised I've no idea what to do. So, the guy who sold it to us, he showed us what to do. And from then on, it's just been a steep learning curve. What I have loved about owning a vineyard and following it through the seasons, etc., is part of the fact that I know a lot of the theory, but I didn't know the practical, and this whole chasm of difference between the two, and it's been very, very humbling, and I've loved that. And we've learned lots along the way. So with this vineyard, we decided we weren't going to use any weed killers. We were going to use organic fertilizers. We were going to be we didn't necessarily want to be certified organic, but follow roughly an organic program, trying to bring life back into the soil. So we've, one of the first things we did actually was, because when it rained, we realised there was a little river running through our vineyard and half the soil ended up sort of just at the bottom. So one of the first things we did was hire a man with a digger to clear out the ditches round about, so to improve the drainage, so that our vineyard soil didn't disappear sort of 50 metres down the road. And that was a pretty good investment. That made a huge difference. And then we put compost in. Cow compost. We've experimented with different ones. Just green vegetable matter, also guano, which is it's more of a fertilizer, bird poo, and cow manure as well that we've put on. I distinctly remember having a whole load of cow manure delivered, 30 tons of it. And then it's like, oh, that's nice. Now, how do we get it onto this vineyard? Because we don't have lots of big machines to do that. So we had to hand load it onto a little truck with a tiny little sort of a tipper thing on the back, and did it that way. So it was very labour intensive. But actually loading cow manure is not as horrible as you might think. It was actually not too unpleasant. But anyway, I digress. So we did lots of different things, bringing life back in the soil. And the first year, 2011, we made a wine, 300 bottles of the wine. And not very exciting because there's no label on it. But this is the wine we made, the Languedoc cross on the bottle. And it was pretty good. We made 334 bottles, I think it was. And the grapes were sold to the Cave Cooperative, the rest of them. And it was good. We drank it with family and friends. We didn't sell it. It was quite a simple wine, but there was good fruit to it. Then the next year, 2011, this has got a label on it. Again, it was, has this got a number on it at the bottom? No, but 2012, we tried to pick a little bit earlier because the 2011 had quite high alcohol. It was 14.5%. We thought, well, maybe we'll try and pick a bit earlier, still 14%, and reduce the alcohol. But actually, funny enough, the wine wasn't quite as good. It almost seemed more alcoholic because there wasn't the ripeness at the core of it. So we learned really actually pick on flavour. Don't worry about the sugar levels. And then in 2000, we didn't make one in 2013. And then in 2014, we came out of the Cave Cooperative, and this was our first vintage of a wine that where the grapes, all the grapes from the vineyard went into it. 100% Syrah. And it's drinking beautifully now. And by this time we got an idea of the style of wine that it made. Yes, quite alcoholic, very rich fruit, very sort of black cherry, plum fruit. But this vineyard has got quite low pH, high acidity, so there's a freshness to it, almost like a Rhone-like freshness. So people have often said it's almost, rather than a Languedoc, it's more like a sort of northern Rhone. So, and it's because of that low pH and acidity that gives a freshness, and it means that it's better after 3-4 years in bottle. Our 14, I mean, we sold out of it, but it's still tasting really well, and the 15 is absolutely perfect now, and the 16 is too young. So it's a wine that improves in bottle, most definitely. So what has happened since then? Well, one thing that we have noticed is that every year some of the vines die. They're not diseased, they just, you notice them a couple of years before, they're getting a bit less vigorous, and the year before they go, the grapes are tiny, and you don't pick them because they're just too acid, and then they die. Now, in vineyards, vines die, for whether for disease or just sometimes they do. You don't have a vineyard where it's like, no, all vines are, for all the 40 years of its life, there's no vine death. It just happens. It's just one of those things. But when it happens a lot, then it obviously questions the economics of the vineyard. Now, why have the vines died? There is it affects Syrah particularly, and it is a phenomenon in French which is dépérissement. I don't just death, perishing. I don't know quite how you just translate that into English, but it affects Syrah, not just in France, but other parts of the world as well. But it was first recognized in the Languedoc, and it's largely affects vineyards that were planted in the 1990s. This vineyard was planted in 1994, and it's to do with the planting stock. So it's what you bought from the nursery, and that is the origin of it. And certain clones and certain rootstocks are more susceptible, and the combination of certain clones and rootstocks means that it is far more likely, and then exacerbated by the soil and where it is, etc. So the most susceptible clone is 99R, and the most susceptible rootstock is 110 Richter. And yeah, you've guessed it, this vineyard here is planted on 110R Richter, and the clone is 99R. So in a sense, the choice of rootstock, the choice of planting material, although they didn't know it at the time, meant that it was likely to happen. And I think because it's not a non-irrigated vineyard, and so in times of stress, water stress, which you can't avoid, it's sort of depends on the weather, that exacerbates it as well. So yeah, that's what happens. And we knew it was a factor, but we didn't realize quite the rate of it. So Simon pruned this vineyard in winter last year, and he came back saying, you know, there's an awful lot of death. More so last year, and last season it was very wet in spring and then a very dry summer, and that combination of factors seems to have increased the mortality. So we went through last February, we went through and we counted exactly how many vines were missing, and there were about over 50% loss. And given that it's a low planting density of 3,333 vines per hectare, the new vines we planted have been 5,000. It's a low planting density. To get anything like a good yield, you have to really pump up the yield on the vines that are left. And although the relationship between low yield and quality, you can make Syrah is capable of producing a decent wine at reasonable yields. There comes a point where you're just asking too much of the remaining vines, and the quality is going to go down, and the economics of treating the vineyard and working it, etc., for the amount of wine and the quality of the wine you're going to get just doesn't make sense. So we made the decision in February that 2021 would be the last vintage from this vineyard. Then it was frosted. So we estimated we would probably, after the frost, get about maybe about 5-6 hectolitres, which is about 700 bottles. The economics didn't make sense. So we decided to do nothing. Which is why we haven't treated this vineyard. We haven't put any of the sexual confusion pods on for Ver de la Grappe, grapevine moth. We've done absolutely nothing apart from just weeded in the middle. And so I'm just going to show you, I'm going to take you now to the vineyard and turn around. Can't work out how to turn around. Right, I'll do it this way. Okay, I'm going to have to do it like that. Ooh. I'm going to get this for the sound. Apologies for waving around. Okay. So, just going through here. You can see we've got about 3, 4, 5 bunches there. This one, we've got 2 bunches, 1 missing, one missing, three missing there. This one, see, those aren't very developed. They're 3-4 bunches, but they're very weedy, so they will ripen at a different time. One missing. 5 bunches there. Nothing that side. The one that side. Not much there. Another one missing there. And then you see here, this is the effect of the frost, that you get differences in the maturity. These are, you know, look like it's going to be a nice healthy bunch of grapes and far more advanced than the ones we saw down there, or even in the vine next door. So you can't, they will ripen at different times. This is more advanced. So you can just see a few missing there. You can see the ones missing. You can see the differences in ripeness due to the frost. And I was saying about how you can tell when the vine is going to die. I mean, look, there's here there's very yellow leaves. This vine is on the way out. And you can see they often actually produce a lot of grapes, try to produce a lot of grapes when they're on the way out, but they're much smaller and much less developed. This is from the vine next door. You can see that it's quite different. So this is the vineyard that started it all. So this is the vineyard that started it all, but it's yeah, there's lots of it missing, and the frost did rather put the nail in the coffin. But you know what? It's one of those things that this was the start of Domaine La Tasque, and since then we've bought other vineyards. We've actually got vineyards in another area which has got a slightly different microclimate, so more resistant to frost, but less likely to get frosted. And so it's sort of and we've planted white grape varieties, which I'm very excited about. So it's just the natural scheme of things. We would have liked to have had a few more years from this vineyard, but yeah, we are going to rip it up. Whether we'll make any wine from it this year, we'll just have to see. Although we've not treated it, there doesn't seem to be huge. I did see a little bit of odium on the leaves earlier, but on the whole, it looks pretty healthy. It's just uneven crop because of frost. So what we're going to do is yeah, just see what the fruit is like at harvest. Maybe we'll make wine from it, I'm not sure. And we will also put an application in to rip it up. You can't just rip it up without, you have to do lots of paperwork. This is France, lots of bureaucracy. You have to make ask permission to rip it up. So we will do that at some point, and then we'll probably just leave the land fallow for a bit and decide what to do. So yeah, start of the story, but not the end of it. Bye bye.